Check. Okay. Oh, thank you guys. All right, sweet. Let's jump into the next one. So we kind of discussed this in the Q&A section about negotiating, about having those, arguments, about, getting into this place of, logical reasoning, and sometimes it leaves one or both parties extremely frustrated. And I realize I'm out of camera. And so we're going to go into that a little more depth. And with this presentation, unlike the other ones that are more theoretical and more kind of high level understanding, with this one, I want to give you more of a structure and a process that you can remember in order to better handle situations like this. Okay. And as always in the previous presentations, that if you have a question, just raise your hand, call it out. It's all good. I'm looking forward to that. Okay. Oh, it's for those of you who don't know me. I think I know everybody now. Mark Talaga, Center for Identity Potential. We're good. Okay. So we're going to first break down what are the elements that make certain gifted kids, not all gifted kids, but certain gifted kids, very stubborn negotiators. One is a high verbal precocity, meaning they have an enormous amount of knowledge about what they're saying and, their vocabulary that they're using. And it all sounds very adult level. And sometimes that can be very, enticing to engage with at an adult level. And so it kind of gets you drawn in immediately into this idea that, oh, well, they're little adults. And so I'm going to talk to them like they're little adults. And suddenly you find that that doesn't exactly work, and that they're not responding in that same way. The other one is the high reasoning skills, cognitive reasoning, perceptual reasoning, things like that, where they can always make sense of things in their own head, right? It's just the most plain thing in the world to them. And so when they get locked into an idea, they are locked into an idea. And it is impenetrable. And they feel like it is the most well-reasoned thing in the world. And if you're debating it, you're nuts, right? And it really is more of a potential and ability that they have. The third one is there's some level of difficulty with processing, and that could be auditorily processing what you're saying, language processing and keeping it organized in their head, and integrating other opinions. They don't know how to take their well-reasoned, fixed argument and add more data into it, always, right? Sometimes that's very difficult for them. And so there's more of a way to get stubborn or dismissive or to twist your words or to use certain examples that take, you off your game, and then you're locked into this negotiation of trying to get them to understand what you're saying, more or less. And then I put down there the lack of recognizing variables, because while they do take a lot of variables into account, they tend to prioritize specific things as the most important and the only things that matter, right? Well, the fairness of what we're talking about is the only thing that matters. That's it. It's not fair. End of debate. End of story. You can't come through because it's not fair. You're like, okay. And so you're trying to put more context in and more variables, and that's not the only thing that matters. And yes, it does. And so again, they're struggling on that level to bring it in. And so, that's what we call the parent trap. When you're trapped, they got your hooks in you. You are in a state when you feel like you are locked into a power battle. When you feel like your only option is to just bring the hammer down, and be like, look, that's just the way it is. And, that's all there is to it. And sometimes that's fine, by the way. But you feel like you're in this battle for power and you're trying to show respect to the kid, and you're not really getting that respect back sometimes. And that it just feels like it's futile, right? Or you're trying to out-reason them. Good luck. Enough said. You're not going to out-reason them. You're not. So give it up. You can reason with them, and I think that's okay. But to go to this level of believing you're going to out-reason them and be like, you know what? You were right. It's not going to happen. So we're not looking for that. That's when you're in the trap. You're trying to get to that place, not going to happen. Because you're probably too up here, and that's where they live. So they win. And if either side is experiencing emotional dysregulation, if they're melting down or you're melting down, internally or externally, you are in this trap and you need to get out. Because you are not in a place where you are being effective, and it is more likely just going to frustrate you or both parties involved. And that is the trap. That is when you need. So all I'm asking you to do is to recognize when you're in that trap. That's all we can do. Start to create some awareness of that's what Mark was talking about. I'm in that moment. And I'm giving you permission to walk away. Hit the emergency parachute and fly out. You're done. It's okay. Because it's already gone to a place where it's not going to be productive, and it's not going to get you what you need, and you're not really working on the issue that really needs to be worked on anyway. Does anybody else want to share feelings of when else they feel like they're in that trap? Is there anything else? I'm sure I'm not missing stuff. Does anybody else have any experience where they were in that negotiation, they just felt like they were trapped, or that they were just in this futile exchange? Yeah, please go ahead.
Like it was, like I felt like
Right. Right.
Well, I don't want to do that. That was awful.
Yes. Oh, I love that. That was so real. That was great. I appreciate you sharing that, because that's true. You do feel like this. I'm not going to be the way my parent was to me, where they said, it's my way or the highway, and you're shut down and you're going to feel small. And that's all there is to it. Not that that's what it was, but it's that level, right? Okay. And so instead we're like, no, I'm going to be the reasonable one, and I'm going to work with you, and I'm going to validate your feelings, and I'm going to be super parent. And it's like, why do I want to pull my hair out? So it's because, yes, there's giftedness involved. There's high levels of intelligence involved. There's high levels of, and I mean this in the most loving way possible, there's high levels of manipulation involved. They're not trying to, but they are. You're going to say something? For those of you on the Zoom recording, she taught her child to never settle and to always ask for more in a negotiation. I love that. God bless you. It does. You know what, though? It's the right message, because in real negotiation, we're not looking for compromise. I don't believe in compromise. This is going to sound crazy. I don't believe in one side has to give something up. I believe that you can come to a conclusion where you can work together to find something that fits, that everybody can live with and works with, and doesn't ask another person to compromise. I'm not going to ask my wife to go to an escape room with me every weekend because I like it. She hates it. I would never ask her to compromise herself that way. She might, because she's so loving, but that's not how this works. And so it's not about giving something up of yourself and sacrificing who you are. And so we try to be cautious of that as parents. We don't want to give up and make them give something up of themselves because they have something they're trying to say, but it can be very difficult. And so there's some tenets that I created. This is what I was just saying. So negotiation that does not work to serve both sides is really some way that's protecting a vulnerability. The reason we're in this negotiation that feels inflexible is because there's a vulnerability underneath it somewhere. I will guarantee it. And it could be on either side, by the way. It could be in our vulnerability about what's going on and what we're really struggling with. Our vulnerability is wanting to be a parent that is supportive, but knows what's right. And that's a vulnerability, right? Because we're really working hard and we really care. And it's hard because we're, in this power dynamic. And so we want to be aware of that on both sides and what is really going on. And so I started putting this process together, and it turned into an acrostic before I even knew it was. And it spells the word treasure, and I don't know how to tie it in with this talk. So it's just the word treasure. I guess I could have named it something more pirate themed for the talk, but that's just what it is. But these are the steps that when I'm in the counseling room that I have drilled into me, that have been trained into me as a professional and an expert and gifted. And this isn't exactly like a sequential order, so I don't want you to get caught up on the idea that this is one, then the other, then the other. But all of these are important skills that you will have to develop in order to create these negotiations from these very struggling power battles to something a little more effective in what you're really looking for. So we'll take them one piece at a time. So we'll start with the T. Take it seriously. And let me change this real quick here. You know, sometimes the request is ridiculous. I feel like I should stay up till midnight every night, and I don't understand why you're fighting me on this. I want to stay up. And there's a part of us that's like, what? No, what are you talking about? Like, no, that's not going to happen. Now, if they don't accept that and they fight it and they bring it up every day, no, I want to stay up later. I want to stay up later. This isn't making sense. I never get any time for myself. I'm, this, that, and the other. You have to there's something in what they're saying. I don't care how ridiculous it seems, right? You have to take it seriously because there's a vulnerability we're dealing with. So for the example of staying up late, there probably is a vulnerability where they're cranking through school, let's say, and it's draining them. And then they come home and then they go to an extracurricular activity and then they come back and then they have to do homework and then they eat dinner and then they have 1 hour before bed. And on some level, they're feeling extremely vulnerable around this. They're like, I don't have time to do what I want. I feel like I'm not able to do this. I have no energy. I can't manage it. I'm struggling. I'm whatever. But they've come up with the solution on their own. I get to stay up till midnight. Well, maybe. And it's possible that we can say, well, you can try it, but the second you're late to school one time, then we have to reevaluate, right? You have a camera in your house? No, of course not. But it's relatable, isn't it? This is what you deal with. You're not alone. Yeah, and so the other thing is that there's a sensitivity aspect. We were just talking about this. There's a lot. Now, not every kid is super sensitive. I was one of them, but not everybody. But for some of them that are, when they're trying to communicate and they start to well up and they start to get really emotional and they're feeling like they can't get there and they're trying to argue and you're kind of hitting them over the head with logic on why it's not making sense. And you're right, but for some reason they're really getting upset around it. You're missing the point. There's something that they're trying to convey. And we need to say, whoa. It doesn't feel like we're talking about this thing anymore. You're talking about something else. You're getting emotional for a reason. And I want to take this very seriously because you are trying to tell me something, even though you might not have the words right now, right? So we start with this in mind. And if we can start with this in mind, knowing again that there's a vulnerability underneath and we're going to do our best to find out what's going on underneath, we have a better footing for how to work with them. Now, I am a huge believer in reflection. Now, if you've done any studying about psychology at all or counseling at all, you'll know that it's a Rogerian approach, this reflection, right? It's a person-centered approach where all you are doing in a therapeutic setting is listening intently, actively listening to everything that is being presented to you and reflecting it. And in that reflection, it does one of two things. It is either reflected back to them in a way where they're like, well, no, that's not what I mean. And they get clearer. Or it reflects back to them in a way where it's absolutely what you're hearing and saying, and they go deeper, right? Makes me so mad when mom and dad talk to me like I'm a kid. Wow, yeah. Makes you mad when they talk to you like a kid. Yeah, I just feel like they don't listen to me. So you don't feel like they're listening at all. No, they're not. They never hear me. Okay. What's that like for you, right? All I'm doing, reflecting, going deeper. I am not going to assume I know what the issue is. I could jump to conclusions like crazy. Well, are you listening to them? Maybe you're not. Can't be listened to if you're not listening. And so, but I'm going to take that kid to the place where I'm really understanding what it's really about, what they're really feeling, what's really underneath. And that's hard to do, even in verbal kids. Sometimes they don't have that ability. And so sometimes you have to reflect the silence, or they say, I don't know. Yeah, you don't know, huh? What's it like that you don't know? You know, you're just taking them deeper. You're staying with them and what they're saying, because I will tell you this very clearly. People choose their words very carefully. Kids choose their words very carefully. It may seem like they're just kind of blah, 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 but there's a reason that each word they use. And so when you reflect back to them, use the words they're using. Use their words back to them. If they say you're being annoying and you're like, okay, so you think I'm annoying. What about me is being annoying? How am I annoying you? I want to know more about that. I'm annoying. You don't get defensive. You don't take it personally. You want to really reflect back what you're hearing. And you want to reflect back not just the words, but the way they're saying it. You know, it's funny, whenever you call me annoying, you can't look at me. It's like you want to say this to me, but you're afraid you're going to hurt my feelings, right? You're just reflecting back what you're seeing. And then I threw a little interpretation on that. You know, and we try not to interpret or analyze if possible. True reflection is very hard because it makes you feel like you're parroting. It just sounds like you're saying right back to them what they're saying. So real reflection is a very nuanced skill that is designed to help the listener, the person you're listening to, rather, the communicator, hear themselves. Because when we hear ourselves, we either correct course because it's not right, or we try to elaborate and we feel really heard. And feeling heard, they are not going to hear you. Your kids are never going to hear you unless you are really hearing them. I promise you. And sometimes that means, yes, you have to live through the little venom and the little outbursts and the things they throw at you, the little barbs that they know are trying to twist the knife and get at you. And you just have to listen and say what they're saying. What's going on with that, right? And so reflection is a big thing. And I could talk more about this. I could probably even demonstrate it if you wanted, but it's any questions on reflection? Anything sound confusing or feels like it wouldn't work on your kids? Anything like that? I want to know. Okay, cool. That was easy. Then we're trying to evaluate. Okay, so once we start reflecting, once we reflect down to them and we're getting to a deeper level of understanding on what they're really struggling with, right? You know, I feel like I deserve more time on the computer. It's not fair. You don't feel like it's fair. You don't feel like you have enough time. Enough time. What does that mean, enough time? What are you really not feeling there? You don't have enough time. Well, I have this and I have that and I have this and I have that and I never have any time. To me, that sounds like you're stressed. I could be wrong, but it sounds like you're feeling stressed about how much you have in your life right now. Well, yeah, I got that, you know, and just my one way to relax. It's your one way to relax? Just one? That's all you got? See, just putting it right back. And what am I really saying to them in that? Right? You can start to hear what I'm really saying as they hear themselves. You only have one way to relax? They're going to hear what I'm saying to them, what they're really saying. This is all I got. I don't know how to relax any other way. I don't know how to expand myself. I don't know how to, you know, figure out this problem another way. I feel stuck. I'm feeling stressed and I don't have anything else. That's all through reflection. And so when you start to do that successfully, you can evaluate what they're really feeling and what they might be up against. Oh, yes, we got a question way in the back. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Don't say that, because then you're just getting defensive. You're going to say, oh my gosh, you feel like I was being sarcastic. I want to be sure I'm very clear with you. My intention is not to be sarcastic. I'm really trying to hear you. Now, there's a difference in the way I said that versus I'm not being sarcastic. I'm trying to listen. You idiot. No, I'm not saying that you're saying that, but it's more like you've got to be careful of that reaction you're having. You always have to be monitoring yourself, your emotional feeling. If you feel like you have to explain or debate or get defensive, then you're not really in a reflective state, because it's more about them than you. It's hard. I'm telling you, it is difficult because they're quick. I've been trained for this for 10 years and I'm still not that great at it. I mean, I'm pretty good, but it's not something you pick up overnight, but it is something you can start to integrate into, to put it back on them. You're really trying to keep the tension and the awareness on them because you want to really listen. But again, if they're accusing you of being sarcastic, that tells me something too. It tells me that they're not really used to be listened to at a really deep level. And that's not like a critique on you. I think that's just in their life. Like, wow, when's the last time you really felt listened to? You know, you start to pick up on stuff like that. And even if it veers off course of the conversation, you're still going somewhere where it's going to relate back to what you're talking about. And as you're evaluating, you're looking at all the different things that come up for you. There's no bad ideas when you start to really listen to somebody. For some reason, I think of, you know, they're talking to me about these kids at school. And for some reason, I think of their family system. I don't know why. It just popped in my head as they were talking. I don't dismiss that as a therapist. Now, I might not always use it, but I'll be like, you know, it kind of reminds me of like how you are with mom and dad. I don't know if there's any connection there or not. I always come from a place of curiosity, by the way. It's never a place of I know what it is and I'm analyzing them and telling them. I always can admit I might have it wrong, but I don't dismiss it either. I don't say, well, what I came up with was stupid and has nothing to do with what we're talking about. I just put it out there. And more often than not, it gives you something good. So you're evaluating what is really going on with them. What is this really about? And you almost want to take it as the original argument is always the symptom. And what you're really trying to figure out is what the real problem is. What is really hard about this? Why is it so important to you? What are you really struggling with? What am I really struggling with? All that. That is what you're evaluating for as you reflect and pay attention to yourself. Now, this part's the fun part. This is where you kind of get to push back a little bit. Now you get to assess if they're hearing you. Because if you've done your job, you're hearing them. And so you've done it. You have heard them. You are spending time. You are actively listening to them. You are not going to be taken off track by some logical debate. I'm really, listening. And then you say, what are you hearing from me? What are you hearing me say? And then they're going to give it back to you. Now, they might give it back to you in a snarky tone, but if they're hearing you, that's gold. Or they are interpreting what you're saying. You feel like all I do is play video games. I never said that. I do not feel that way. I never said all I feel like is you're playing video games. What I said is my concern is that the only option you have for free time is with video games. I'm concerned about that. But I feel like you didn't hear my concern. You'll be shocked with how much this happens on both sides, where the other party isn't really listening. Now, this is also kind of marriage therapy now that I think about it. So, do this, practice on your spouses. Can they repeat it back to you? Are they going too fast? Are they interpreting? And when you start to realize what they're hearing and what they're not hearing, then you reflect again. Oh, you really think I think you're an addict. Is that really what you think? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, I'm glad we got that figured out. I don't think you're an addict. I think you're dependent. Whatever it is, right? You're trying to go through this place of making sure that they're hearing you. And if they won't hear you or can't hear you or constantly not be like, it's interesting. I feel like I'm being very clear in what I'm saying, but you're having a hard time hearing me. And again, you are not going to move past that or get back to the logic of the argument or the details of the argument. You are going to stay in the moment. You are going to be connected to what is happening in the moment. That is your most powerful place of connection. And when I'm in a room with somebody and I can hear them, I call it spiraling upward into symptom level stuff. I go, whoa. We were just talking about something very real. And then all of a sudden you wanted to go talk about something else. You haven't answered my question about, or you haven't given me a reaction to me saying I'm concerned. Now, it might sound like this is really heavy and intense. It can be, but it's a very real way to converse. It's real communication. It's saying, I have something to say, you have something to say, and I'm going to keep us here to make sure that we are hearing each other, because that is the only way we're going to get somewhere. It's a super valuable skill, and it's really tricky to do with gifted kids. I'm telling you right now, don't expect to be good at this. Don't expect to be perfect at this. We're just looking for a little bit of shift or having more tools in your bag that help you get to a different place than the typical kind of patterned back and forth that we seem to have with our loved ones, right? We get entrenched in these dynamics that just happen on autopilot. We're trying to break out of that. And so after you've assessed that they're hearing you and they're really listening to you now, or on some level they're hearing you better than they were, or we've kind of corrected that to where they're on board with you, this is where you get to own your vulnerability around whatever it is you're negotiating around. My concern is that if you're allowed to take the car out, and don't have to come back until midnight. My concern is that you're going to be putting yourself in danger, and you're not yet a skilled enough or experienced enough driver to where nighttime driving, or when people are typically the most drunk and out, that puts you at risk. That's my concern. That's my real concern, is your safety. You know, I'm worried about that. I'm concerned about that. I'm owning what I'm really, or I'm concerned that if you only play video games and that's all you do, that's going to put you in a little box that you're never going to grow as a person. I'm concerned that it stunts your growth. And my job as a parent is to make sure I help you develop. That's my job. You know, and I don't need you to do anything different. I don't need you to be anything different, but that's my honest to God concern. And so you're owning that. And this last point I put there, don't make assumptions of failure. What I mean by that is, don't say to them something like, I'm concerned that if I give you this, you're going to screw it up. You know, if I tell you, if you say to me, Mom, I'm gonna clean my room, I'm gonna do it. Don't assume that, like, well, you know, you say that, but I don't believe it. Because that doesn't really get you what you want. If you're getting them to say, I will do it, then you own that part of you that it starts to get afraid of that. Be like, look, historically, we've been down this road before, and we've been here before, and you said you'd do it, and then it didn't get done. And I don't, you know, I'm here to support you in doing this, but I'm afraid we're missing something where your words and the actual action, where there's pieces we're missing. You know, I feel like we don't have it fully figured out yet, because I feel like don't you feel like we've been here before, that we've done this before? You know, and when you get into that real place of owning your feelings, and you're using historical data, not as a way to say it's going to fail, but as a way to say, let's look at history and integrate that in, then, you know, you have a better chance of them hearing you, and a better chance of actually taking the problem and expanding it out into what really may be the struggle around that, right? And you're always allowed to be concerned. You're always allowed as a parent to share your concern, and don't let them make it about, oh, you're disappointed, or it's never enough for you, and all that kind of stuff. That's a trap, right? If you feel like you're getting emotionally manipulated because you said you're concerned, you can call that out, right? All right. This is the big one. Use your relationship. You know them, they know you. You know them very, very well. You are connected with them. You know, if this is your kid, this is your kid. You were there, you changed their diapers, you know them. And while we don't ultimately ever know a person 100%, because we can't, we know a lot about them, and we know who they are, and we know where they struggle, and we know where they're sensitive, and we know all these things, and we need to be able to use that. We need to be able to say, look, I have your back. Please don't paint me as a monster. You know, and my intention is to work through this problem with you together. I went to a seminar and learned all about how to do this better, and I am working and I am trying to be better. I'm not a monster. I'm a good parent. Stop making me feel like I'm not. No, you're not bad. All of you here, give me a break, are doing what you need to be doing to get better at dealing with very complicated, you know, gifted issues, right? And so I kind of mentioned this before, but using relative historical examples, cutting through the BS is my favorite thing to do, because you can do it really quickly. And if you do it right with a gifted kid, they fold immediately. They really do. If you're like, they're like, no, I will do it. Be like, look me in the eye. How many times have you said that to me? And then just hold the silence, right? Hold the tension. You can do that with people. We really want that from people. We really, you know, gifted kids are funny because they want things their way, but they also want to grow. They want to be pushed on some level, but they're going to make you work for it. They're going to make you work so hard to where it almost feels like it's pointless, but it's not. You got to hang in there. I'm this way. If I had Andy here, my mentor, he would tell you what hell I have put him through while he trained me, because I fought him on everything because it didn't make sense to me. He's like, well, that is an issue with your dad. I'm like, no, it's not. That's ridiculous. This is your stuff. And I would just go on the attack. Boom, boom, boom. And he would always kind of reflect what I was saying, and he would use my words, and it would frustrate me because I didn't want to really be listened to at that level. But eventually he got to a place where he would always use his relationship with me and be like, do you really think I'm here to hurt you? And I would crumble. I would crumble so fast because I'd be like, no. And he'd be like, what am I really trying to say to you? And I would get clear on what he was really trying to say, but I was fighting him because the way he was saying it was wrong, right? Kids will do that to you. They will say that the way you said it was wrong, or that word you used, that wasn't right, or this isn't exactly correct. Okay. Go to intention. What's my intention? I may not have said it perfectly. You're right. But what's my intention? What am I really trying to say to you? You're smart. Tell me, maybe leave that last part out. But if you can break through that piece and get them to really hear what you're about, you can align again. You can get back on the same page of what you're trying to do. You're trying to grow. You're trying to solve a problem. You're trying to figure something out together. But it will grate you and it will be difficult and they will push you and it won't go well at times and you'll want to throw the towel, in the towel. But it's something that it's okay. It's part of the process. Gifted kids need to go through those, emotional outbursts and things that they're stuck on. They need to work through them and you need to be able to go through them as well. And if you can use a relationship in doing that, you will break through. And always remember that the relationship is the priority. That actually should have been at the top because they're going to make it about the topic. They're going to make it about the detail. And we have a tendency to get caught in the detail. And we want to argue about the details. That's what they do. They got it from you. So, spoiler alert. And at the end of the day, you have to remember what matters most is that we work through this because our relationship matters more than whatever we're talking about. We need to have a relationship where we can work through stuff like this. Right? And you put that right on the table. We need to be able to talk through this stuff. We need to be able to, as you're getting older, we need to be able to talk through really hard things. And we got to learn how to do that. And I'm learning and you're learning, but more than anything, this stuff doesn't really matter, but you and I matter, right? The relationship is always the priority. And so never forget that either when you're dealing with kids and when you're because that's what will cut through to where they're really at. They can listen to that. They can hear that. When you put your relationship as like, hey, this is what this is really about, you shift the tone of the conversation completely. And relate. You have the ability to relate. Nothing that they're experiencing is so outside the realm of understanding that you can't relate to it on some level. Now, the specifics you might not be able to relate to, but you can relate to what it's like arguing with mom and dad, right? You can relate to what it's like, when you didn't feel heard. You can relate what it's like when you felt like, you needed, something in life, and you can relate to the pain of it all. You can relate to being frustrated when you're trying to argue something and you can't get the words out. It's all relatable. As long as you don't get stuck in the detailed symptomology, top level stuff. I once asked, I had to go through this incredibly rigorous training program out in Virginia. I had to fly out there once a month for 9 months. And it was a weekend long, and you had to present this huge presentation around an issue you were having in your work life or your personal life, and then how it related to the other side of it. And then you had to put in who are the players and who has the power and who's the alignment and where are your boundaries and what have you tried? And it's this massive thing. And then you sit in front of a group of 11 other people, and then there's 2 of the best family therapists in the world just drilling you. Like, it was no joke. And I once asked the guy, Harry Aponte, who was a very famous family therapist. I go, what if you don't relate to somebody? What if you don't, pick up on their issue? And he's like, at a certain age, you can relate to anything. Anything. Because we all have pain. We all have wounds. We all have areas in our life where we're struggling. And so do your kids, right? It's okay. That's just part of the human condition. It's what binds us as much as it sucks. And so we always have that ability to say, I'm starting to realize that this is what you're up against. And I can relate to that. I've actually gone through that as well. Now, what we can't do is we don't project our experience onto them as though they're experiencing the same thing we experienced. They might be having different reactions. So we don't say, when I was your age and I was arguing with my parents, What worked for me was I would take a deep breath before I said, it's like, okay, well, that's what worked for you. That's great. This is a different person. As much as they are part of you, they are their own person. And the purpose for relating is just to make it feel like they're not alone, that they're not going through this all by themselves, right? Now, you can see how we're going from negotiating around later bedtime, more video games, eating junk food, to real connection and relationship and understanding about how a symptom is really has something at the root of it that connects us all. That's the goal. So I'm kind of teaching to be therapists, so I think you can handle it. And then after you've gotten to that point, if you're relating and you're understanding the issue and you kind of get to this place of, okay, I see what this is really about. What you're really looking for is a little more freedom. What you're really looking for is a little more of me listening to you better. What you're really looking for is this, So here's how we want to make it look. I'm willing to let you do X, but because I have vulnerabilities around this, I need you to meet me and do it this way so that you're getting what you want, but I also feel like my boundaries are intact and I'm not being a bad parent that's letting you just get away with anything, right? And you can get to that place, and if you get to that place, and you might not get it in one argument or one session, whatever you want to call it, you can get to a place of execution. And I encourage it. I use this a lot. Put it in writing. Write it down. Have both of you sign it. Get clear. Really get the details out. Get the caveats out. What are we afraid of are the obstacles and the pitfalls that might get in the way of this executing and sustaining for a long period. And we need to write out what happens if that happens. So there's always an expectation that even if the plan fails miserably, it didn't really fail. It's just more information. And we know what the consequence is, right? If you come back home, 5 minutes after you said you are, well, that means that this then happens. The logical consequence is you got to come home 5 minutes earlier the next day, whatever. And so everything can be accounted for on some level so that everybody feels like their boundaries are intact. So a lot of this can be done in when kids are going to college, which is something you'll probably all have to deal with on some level. When kids go to college, there's a lot of parents that feel like they can't have boundaries in place because the kid's gone. And they just kind of got to say they're hoping everything's okay. And they're a little panicked and anxious and they call 10 times a day or whatever it is. Or the kid calls 10 times a day. And it's not really the case. You don't have to go through that. If you go through this process, if you go through the process of talking about in a real way what these concerns are that we're feeling because we know you and we know what you're really struggling with and how this might be an issue, and you start to come up with a plan like, okay, look, if why don't we monitor your grades? I know that's not a great idea for a lot of people, but for some people it's like, well, why don't we do that so that you don't have to, and then we can kind of be connected with you in that way. And it feels like if you're struggling, then we can come back and you're not alone and you don't have to be in shame around it and bring it up to us, right? I don't know. I don't know what family that works for, but it might work for somebody. You're always allowed to create this plan and you're always allowed to renegotiate a contract. You can always come back to the table and be like, this isn't working. I know this is what we agreed upon, but we need to talk about this because I am not okay with this aspect that we didn't plan for. And you always can come back and go too. That goes to your kids too. They can come back and be like, look, this isn't working for me, blah, 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 blah. You can always come back and renegotiate because some parents are like, well, I told them they could do this. I'm like, yeah, now you have new information. And now you've talked with me and I've explained some issues and some vulnerabilities that you weren't even aware you had. And so now you got to go to your kid and say, we need to talk about this again because there's new information on the table. You can always do that. Always. Never feel like you're stuck. Make them feel like you're stuck. Okay, now, questions. Holy smokes. I feel like we threw a lot at you. Is this helping? I don't know. Is this, usable? Is this something you can relate to? Maybe not. But is there any questions here or concerns or scenarios you anticipate? Sure. Mm-hmm. Say that last part. Okay. So when you were mad, were you mad at the kids or were you mad at the Taekwondo place? Uh-huh. Now you're thinking. Yeah. 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 So you're saying when you were able to remove all these distractions, when you were able to put that as his focus, and basically what you did is you created urgency and priority around this issue in his life for him. Now, it's not a bad thing, right? But you got to realize that, okay, we had to create priority and urgency for him. And it felt like we were doing it in a way where we were like punishing him, right? And it's more about, okay, he wasn't able to create urgency and priority for himself. And there's a skill, that's all skill. And then he's saying he doesn't really care about it, doesn't really like it. And then we got to evaluate, well, is it you don't like it because you're not doing well at it? Or is it because we have to go to this length to get you to do it? Or do you really not care about it? I don't know, right? And then you got to look at the Taekwondo people like, hey, you know, he's really struggling to get through this kata or whatever they call it in Taekwondo of, you know, doing this issue, you know, is there any way that you can work with him on this so that you're creating the structure for him to do it because you're paying for it and hopefully they can help you out with that. But basically you had to create a structure that he was unable to create on his own, right? That's what happened. And as parents, you're allowed to do that. What I need you to take it out of is the model of, you know, the punishment piece of it, right? Not that you did anything wrong because it worked, right? You did what he did and you got him to get through it, which is important. But it's more about like, you know, executing it at a level where you really understand that if we don't do this, he's really struggling to do it because we told him time and time and time and time and time and time and time again. And so that should tell you something that he's unable on some level to make that structure happen. He's unable to create urgency. And a lot of kids are the same way. That's not just your kid, I'll guarantee you. Yeah. 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 Right. So you're dealing with it. Yeah. So it's more about having that conversation about like, we don't want to have to rely on this method that does seem to get results because it just goes back to the way things were. It's like you got to start to call out that the process has a flaw in it somewhere. And you're not going to take blame on it for yourself. You're not going to put blame on them, but it's more like we have a flaw here. We have been caught in this dynamic where in order to make something happen like that, this is what we do. And then this happens, right? And so what are we missing here? Why is this? How do we avoid that? How do we create more structure around that in a way where it doesn't have to always come to an ultimatum point, you know? And that's sometimes how you can look at it as well, right? And so again, when you're negotiating around that, there's a vulnerability, and the vulnerability in that case is he can't create that level of intrinsic motivation around something. Now, I would always evaluate, like, does he really like it, right? Now, this is just me. This is my bias and my value. Because my belief is, you know, just because they're good at something doesn't mean they have to do it, right? Just because you're good at math doesn't mean you go into math as a career. That might not be who you are as a person. Now, when they're young, though, they need to learn discipline and skill, and, you know, that's okay. I'm not saying it's do anything differently. But I would evaluate like, well, do you even like this? Like, is this doing anything for you? But if you believe he does, then you have to go more to the vulnerability of, You like it, you're good at it, you want to be better, but you really don't know how to create structure around the practice. And until he gets to that point, you might have to create it. And every time we do that, we can negotiate on what that's going to look like and how we can, integrate a reward system or whatever works, I don't know. But you got to look at your process rather than this shouldn't keep happening, right? Whenever you go to this place of, gosh, this incident shouldn't keep happening. We shouldn't have to keep dealing with this. Your process is off. That's all that means. And that's for any system, anything you're trying to build anywhere. And so you look at it from that term. So yeah, I hope that hopefully that helps, but that's kind of a very good example of, when getting to the real vulnerability is really tricky because we believe on some level, or we assume on some level they can do something. And that assumption can get us into trouble because we have to really look at the data in front of us. I assume they can do it, but they've never been able to do it except for in the moments of when we create the environment where they have to, basically. And that tells us that they're struggling to do it on their own. If you ever read the book Positive Discipline by Jane Nelson, it's a great book. It's lovely. It's a good way to start to engage with kids and help them be players in the solution, and but still creating this level of discipline around, we're here as parents. Here's how I believe parents should be. It's like a benevolent dictatorship. Okay? You're a dictator. You are in charge and your word is the law, but you're benevolent about it, right? You care about them. You want them to grow, but it is not always this egalitarian, everybody gets equal weight and equal say and there's fairness throughout, because it's not reality. It never works in that way. It's nice to think about. But part of that means that, yes, as benevolent dictators, we really have to listen to our subjects. I actually don't like this metaphor the more I'm talking about it, but it's more like it's a two-way street. And we have to look at where we are vulnerable, where we keep getting caught up, where we're struggling as parents to affect the change that we want to change because we assume it needs to come from them. And we're trying to behaviorally do everything we can possible, but we're missing something typically. And we're missing that vulnerability. And that's a very big part. And so that's what all these skills that I talked about are there to help start to bring out and get a little more clarity into. All right. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. Right. So the first thing you're going to do is when they start to get emotional, you're going to reflect. You're going to say, whoa, okay, hold on. You're feeling really upset and I can see it. And I don't want to go further until we kind of talk through what's going on, and you stay right there with them. Push everything else to the side. And then what you can do as a parent is if you really understand what's going on with them, you can make it explicit for them. So they have the context said out loud in a sense where you're saying, I feel like you're getting emotional. It sounds like you're getting emotional because every time you're trying to talk about this, it's hard to get the words out. And when you can't get the words out, you start to feel really upset about that. And I think what we're dealing with is I think you need a lot more time to process what you want to say about this than you think. So we're going to take a break. And what we can do is we can wait until things are chill and we can work on it together. We can try to write things out. Sometimes writing it out is better than saying it. Maybe we want to rely on that skill. But I don't want to go forward in this conversation until I know that I'm getting what you need to say out, because that's what's most important, that I hear you, right? And so you don't really move past that issue until there's a resolution there, or you give them the skill, or you give them the way forward. Because we don't want to keep going into that dynamic over and over and over where they're just trying to muscle themselves through. Because I'll tell you what happened to me is I learned to shut down my feelings. I learned that it wasn't okay. Because every time I felt small and I felt stupid and I felt embarrassed and I thought crying was a sign that I didn't know anything. And so It wasn't until later when I realized how to integrate my feelings into conversation and integrate my authenticity around how I'm feeling around things and owning that, that I started to feel more like myself again. You know, and so we want to teach kids very early on that that is not a problem, but we're going to protect your vulnerability around it right now because it's overloading you. And so here's some other ways. It's a good question though. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Tries to act indifferent. Let's go back to where it is. Cut through the BS. Use your relationship. I know you, and I know this affects you. And even though if you're not consciously aware of it right now, I have a feeling that this really bothers you. You know, it's okay to do that. And you can be wrong. Allow yourself to be wrong because they will correct you if you're wrong. Trust me. And then you get what you want anyways, because they'll say what they need. But you do not buy for a second that he doesn't feel anything. Do not buy for a second that that is not in there. Now he's learned to cover it up. He's learned to move around it. That's okay. We're going to give him a little bit of that for a while. No big deal. But you don't need to buy into it. You don't need to, participate in believing that he doesn't have any feelings around certain things. And you could be like, I have a feeling it does bother you. I could be wrong, but I feel like somewhere, some small part of you is upset or is sad or is hurt or is whatever. It's okay. Yeah.
So she was pulled up in a closet for 2 hours and wouldn't come out until I signed a contract that she was giving her little sister to make sure it was legal,
Nice.
that I would never use computer time.
Ooh. Yeah. 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 Wait, what does it say? Oh, you can never go back on the contract. I know. Yes. Yes. Yeah. That vulnerability, oh boy, you are talking about the gifted family dynamic, Yeah, I know you don't know. It's there. It's okay. I mean, that's it. Yep. I know. Yeah, and I can tell that. And so it's complicated. It comes to a point where you've got to look and say, as wonderful as my kid is, as amazing as it is, and as much love as there is in this family towards each other, is this getting to be outside of my scope? Okay. And if it is, all that means is you need more support. You need more help. You need other people. You need somebody working with you to help these things, And whether you call us up or email us up, that's fine. If you do, and I don't care, honestly. It's finding somebody to help you alongside so you don't feel like you're overwhelmed constantly by the process, because your vulnerability is getting, I don't like this word, but attacked unconsciously. She doesn't mean to be doing it. Yeah, I know you know. Okay, good. But it still happens. And so we have to say, whoa, I can't continually go into this and time again, have to put Humpty Dumpty back together every time when, it may be outside of my scope right now until things get a little more stabilized or regulated, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with your kid. I'm telling you right now. It goes in waves, right? And it's a pattern. Yeah. And I guarantee you it will be tied to some level of anxiety or stress somewhere that happens in, I can tell you every time my office is the most busy in October and February. Does anybody want to tell me why? School. October, school has begun and wheels have already started to come off, right? February, third quarter. First quarter, fine. It's fresh and new for a lot of people. They get through no problem. Second quarter, it's starting to get a little shaky, but oh God, there's winter break. Thank goodness. We'll get through winter break. We come back to school. We're starting again. There's not a break for a long time and wheels are off. February. And it's like clockwork. And when it is like clockwork, that's because there's a pattern to it. And because there's a pattern to it, there's a way to start to look at it in a way where you can, you know, get some support around what you really need and find out where these spots are and work through it. But it's very hard to do by yourself. And it has nothing to do with how good of a parent you are, just so you guys know. It's not, you guys could be the cover of Parents Magazine Monthly, and you made it on the Star cover, and your kid is going to be your kid. And that's who they are, and God love them. Go ahead. That's a good question. I want to answer that real quick, and then I'll come back to you. If a kid resists going to therapy, that is okay. Because if they're with a process like us, we don't need the kid then. We just work with the parent. Because there's always ways that we can support you. We're always going to be in that process with you, regardless of you get them to come. And honestly, if they don't want to come, I don't want them. I don't want a kid going in against their will. In fact, that's my one rule. If you come into our office, you got to want to be there, period. Yeah. 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 She's defended, you know, and that's okay. It's all right. You know what I mean? But there's always ways to help. There's always ways to create supports. There's always ways to really understand the issue at a level where you're getting more skill, which then kind of trickles down, right? And creates the systemic change or the structural change that we're looking for that makes it so you're not in the same dynamic all the time. There's always ways to deal with it. Okay, go back to you.
Yeah. So we started noticing it. I don't remember. I think she was younger, and we, you know, I kind of knew about this dynamic with children, so like usually for those just give children choices. And I noticed something interesting. You know, like at that age, there's no conscious decision making. Like I wanted to kind of culture. It was something he made. And I noticed that my little baby was really always struggling.
Yeah.
Despite, you know, me being the old, you know, and I thought that was absolutely fun.
Isn't it?
But there was this need, some craving for being charged.
It's a need to have mastery and control over your environment, which is a human need. So even as an infant, all we have is our ability to cry, right? That's how we just signal that we need a change. We don't like what's happening where it is, where we are. And so we can have very colicky babies. Gifted babies are sometimes notoriously difficult because they still have a level of awareness and observation that is their sensitivities that are higher than most on a bell curve, but they have no way to change it. And so they need things differently. And we treat it differently. We work with it differently. We don't say, well, what does the baby manual say? Because throw that out the window, you know, but you're right. At a very, very, very young age, we have that ability to say, I want things to be different. And anxiety can start then.
Never suppressing bullshit.
Mhm. That's good. You know? Sure. And again, we have waves of developmental growth and change and stress and things can shift and, you know, but you do want to be paying attention like, hey, this is working for us, right? We found something that within our family dynamic is helping and supportive. And I think it's starting to click on why it's working, because that's always important too. You want to know why something is working when you're doing it, right? So you can replicate it. Yeah, but yeah, that's great. In the back. Yeah. Right. Yes.
Is it a development thing and it could be
Right. You know, I wouldn't be too concerned. I'll say that, but I will, to validate some part of it is, yeah, when you have somebody that kind of only does things one way, and yes, there's 5 different ways to do it, but they only want to do one way and none of the other ways matter. And who cares how I'm doing it? Just let me do it this way. You know, that tells you something, right? The most general, painting with the broadest brush I can, issue that's tied to that is that, excuse me, typically gifted kids are fast. And there is a myth that fast equals smart, right? The faster you are, the smarter you are. And so there's this need to like just do things in the way that works the quickest, the most efficient. This is how I do it. Why would I do it any other way? Fast. And so the vulnerability is, I don't like the feeling of slowing down. I don't like the feeling of going through things more meticulously or in a way where I'm showing my work or whatever, right? Where I have to write it all down. I don't see the point in it. Well, they don't see the point in it because it's actually a struggle for them. It's actually hard because slowing down is not something a gifted kid wants to do. And unfortunately, until they learn how to slow down and learn process and learn to foundationally understand things, they're 6 years old driving a Ferrari with their hands above the wheel like this and hoping they can make it to where they want to go. But they don't really know how to drive that, sports car of a brain of theirs in every context, in every situation. And eventually there's a level of challenge where they never learned how to hit process and they hit a ceiling. And you can wait for that ceiling and then say, well, this is part of what we're talking about is we need to slow down. We need to understand foundationally what the vulnerabilities are and scaffold up from there. But it is going to be very hard for you to convince them. And you shouldn't. It's more of a reflection of, it feels like you don't want to slow down. How much does that have to do with it? How much of it is taking your time and going through the process is actually really annoying or painful or, you just don't like it. Does that, you think that has anything to do with not being able to do it in multiple ways? You can use some of your curiosity to kind of put the seed of awareness around, because you're trying to create awareness around the issue, because you can't do anything until there's awareness, period. You can't do any change until the kid has awareness on some level that what you're talking about makes sense, right? That it connects to them. So it's tricky. There's no shortcut, unfortunately, but what you're dealing with is a kid that really struggles to slow down. And if there's a way to integrate that awareness or to find a way for them to get on board with finding something in their life where they are willing to slow down and do things a little more carefully, then that's what you do. And that's how you start to develop it. I think there was one, question. How much do I push, right? So first of all, you need to even at you said 10 years old, 11. Even at 11 years old, you can share that struggle with her. So it's not just you dealing with it. I get concerned as your mom that if I don't push you through things, that you'll just go from thing to thing to thing and you'll never stick with anything, or you'll regret it later in life, or I will have let you down. And you know that, and that's what I'm afraid of. And so I'm having a hard time knowing if I'm not pushing you enough. It's like, what would she respond to that? Give me a general sense of what she might say to it if you were to really share that. So it sounds like she would feel more of the pressure of maybe this is an issue for me, right? It's not your issue is what I'm trying to say to you. It's not. Look, life is long. A lot of people say life is short. Life is long. We always have a chance to go back to things. We can always say, you know, I wish I wouldn't have given up on that. If a kid says to you, I wish you would have never made me quit that. That's nuts. That's nuts. And you're not going to buy it because you're not in control of them. Okay. You can't control that. So they are making a choice and they're telling you where they're at with something. And if they are firm that they do not want to do it, cool. It's all good. Let's try something else. It's all right. They can come back to it. You know, we're not in the business of churning out prodigies. It's not what we're here for. We're here to make healthy, whole individuals that are well-rounded and learn who they are. And sometimes we learn through our by trying thing after thing after thing after thing after thing. And then we realize there's a pattern in our life where we never finish anything. And then we're ready to have somebody hold us to the commitment. You know, that's how I was. So it's a matter of you've got to let go of some of that responsibility because you're doing your best. And she'll understand that part of it. You know, and that's what you share. I'm trying, but just so you know, I feel this dilemma around it. And then maybe she does pick it up a little bit and then there's a small change and she practices a little more and then it doesn't work out. Who cares? Okay. She's got a loving parent and that's all that they need, you know? So I want to relieve that of you because that is a very common thing of how much do I push and, you know, or I have kids that have very severe asynchronous profiles with, you know, diagnoses up the wazoo. And they're like, I feel like I'm always asking for accommodations from everybody. I'm always this, that, and the other. And I just feel like I'm always caught in this. Am I doing too much? Am I not? Oh, it's tough. We're just doing the best we can. You know, and yeah, we try to go and we learn more and we try to get some more insight into things. And that's, you know, that's it. That's the process. You're doing it. Right. Okay. How are we doing on time? We're over, right? Oh, my goodness. All right. Any other questions? Good. We're good. Go ahead. Yes, absolutely. They're saying that to you? Yeah, okay. Right. And so yeah, you're right, though. Culture matters because it is a different value. And I'm not going to assume it's the same value. And because you have a family set of values and a cultural set of values that comes with you. And you know what? That's great. And that's good. And that's part of how you are and how you parent and part of who you are. You know, and you don't need to apologize for that. And you don't need to do it because again, that comparison and then the comparison between them and their other sibling is the same type of ploy in a sense. It's the same way of making it about something rather than what they're really struggling with, about staying with something and sticking with something. And we have a value as a family that we don't give up. You know what I mean? It's every family is different. You know, I like to teach parents that your household is an identity. Right? You create your household into an identity that fits who you are. How do you want that household to look? It's an identity where we're the kind of family that we always push each other and that's what makes us connected. And that's how we are. And that's our true sense of, you know what I mean? That's okay. Or are we a family where, you know, we're, you know, going to deal with it differently. And we're just there in, you know, whatever different way. I don't have an example, but, you know, I don't want to make it seem like there's one right way, one wrong way. You need to be yourselves, the parents that you are, and your kids are lucky to have the parents that they have, right? And you're doing your best to figure out what you need to do to help them, get where they need to go. And so you are allowed to keep your values. And if at some point they want to change their values, that's fine. You don't have control over that, unfortunately. Okay. Once they turn 18, whatever age, they're on their own. But for now, they work with you and they're in your house, right? And this is how we do things here. And we do it out of love, and we do it out of growth, and we do it out of, this is what we know how to do, whatever it is, right? And so to get caught in that, well, you're making me and your way is wrong, and that's not fair, and all these other kids have something different. It's like, I don't know another way to be, kind of a thing. And there's the vulnerability. I don't know how else to be other than your mom, and this is who I am. Take it or leave it. I always tell kids, you're never going to change your parents, so don't even try. The only thing you could do is change you, what you're working on, what you're dealing with, right? We don't change our parents. It's all right.
Yeah. Yes.
Sure. You could use the phrase comparison is the thief of joy, because it is. Because when you start to just compare yourself to everybody else in a context that makes no sense, then you're just robbing yourself of, being able to enjoy where you are and who you are and your challenge against yourself. Comparison is the thief of joy, and competition. This is going to sound like I'm disagreeing with you, but I'm not. Where I don't believe there's a need for competition, because on some level, we all bring our unique self to whatever it is we're doing. If there was a speaker after me that was also a gifted counselor, former video game professional, had all my same backgrounds, and that's not my competition. You know why? Because each of us are going to bring our own unique self to that identity of gifted counselor with former video game background. And that's going to serve people that need that from whatever way, right? And so that's the same thing. Yeah. Aw. Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. Oh boy, that's a tough one, isn't it? What's more important? What are you working through? Is it really your responsibility that they're upset, right? It's not his responsibility, right? That's hard. Good luck. I'll tell you that. How about that? None of it's easy, right? Because we're dealing with kids that are all over the place. So I appreciate you sharing though. Yes. Right.
I feel like I have a child that has high abilities.
Right. Right.
And I feel like I have a one.
Okay. Yeah.
She's been doing the thing, she's doing fine in school, everything is great and growing, but when you dig into her, she's doing it then. And even things that she loves.
Mhm. Right. Well, because it's in what you said, Justin. I have no idea what to do about it, meaning you are taking the responsibility on solving that problem all on yourself. Of course, he says. We don't do anything great alone, okay? It takes a village. It does. So what I would suggest in a sense is, who are you working with that is helping you with this issue? Who are you having in your network, or is there a tutor that could come in that the kid likes, that it has more success of doing these things? Because sometimes as mom and dad, we don't have what we say, if a stranger says it, is heard by them and not heard by us, because we're mom and dad, right? Now, I'm not saying that's the solution to your issue, and I don't want to negate it either, but that belief of feeling stuck and feeling like it's impossible is more of a reflection of the kid's struggle. That may be a little too meta, but there's a challenge that you're up against that you have to break out for you. It's your vulnerability. It's not about what you get the kid to do differently or not differently. It's more about how do you react to it differently by taking a different method of working it out, and what are you doing that you might need to do for you? And for me, it's always like, I need to work with somebody else. I need help. I need help. And I need to talk to somebody else that can help me walk through this, because I'm missing things, because we all have blind spots, everybody. Yep. Right. Yeah, you're not teachers, right? Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Because there's a vulnerability in what you're asking too. Because as much as that teacher might want to, there are vulnerabilities around the teacher and their ability. Now, I'm not making excuses for the teacher because I don't know your situation. But the reality is, I don't want you to feel like you've got no options, right? Because we've got to look at, okay, they respond well to other adults, and especially ones that they have a nice relationship with. The school is not giving us what we need, but we have to find a way to challenge this kid. Now, you are not alone in that situation as I'm describing it. And so, you know, there are gifted groups out there, there are tutors out there are professionals out there like me and other professionals that specifically can help with this issue, right? But it feels like, you know, the way that it should be is not working, and that feels deflating, right? And it's hard, you know, and so it's more like you have to take a step back and say, this problem is bigger than I realized. And the typical way that I would deal with it is not working. And now I have to expand my understanding of what I might need so that I don't feel like this is going to take me down, or I don't feel like I'm to blame, because you're not. Okay. You're dealing with a very, I don't know what to call your kid, but she sounds amazing in a level. Like, I really like her. Like, she just seems wild, and I kind of love that. I don't know if that's even true, but it just sounds, yeah. Okay, good. But I love that. But there's also that part where it's like, who is her match, right? So, you know, I talk about Andy, my mentor, a lot. He was my match. He became the guy that could meet me where I was, and I met my match through him. And so sometimes we need to find that person who, you know, can meet that kid's match, and they realize, okay, they're talking serious, and they're going to help me, and I'm going to be challenged through them, and I kind of like that. Maybe you can call me. We could try to help you out. You know what I mean? You can do that too. Was there another question? Because I think we're at time. Yeah. What's my process when families are working with us? Yeah, there's always a virtual option. We do a lot of telehealth. That's mostly what we do. We work with kids all across the country. When we work with families, so we have a very strict process. I'll just give you our process overall. You call us in, we have our intake person, Jenny Nilsson, who's brilliant, who walks through and gets a general sense of what you're dealing with and what you need. Then in there, we kind of decide, is this within our scope or not, right? And once it is, we say, okay, we can set up a consultation with just the parents. We meet with the parents, we get a deeper background into what's going on, what they need. And then we start to make recommendations on, well, who do they need to see? What kind of services do they need? Do they need executive function support? Do they need therapy? Do they need a group? Do they need whatever? And And then at that point, once we create a relationship with the kid, the parents are very involved. In fact, because we work from like a systems perspective, we work with schools, we work with parents and families, we work with adjunctive support, we work with psychiatrists, whoever is involved in that case, we are connected with and working together. And we can also provide parental coaching or family support or whatever. So we're very comprehensive in our approach because we're big believers in that we don't do things alone and that we have to do it. I could not do this work by myself, period. I'd quit. As good as I am, I would be overloaded like that. I have to have a team. Okay, so I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah. Sure. Yeah, you just can't do it within 1 year. Depends. If the testing doesn't give you enough information or it was focused on the wrong things or it was shit testing, which can happen, pardon my language, it is very appropriate to, but again, it's our team's job to evaluate to say, hey, testing is appropriate here or not. So I'm not going to tell you yes or no. It'd be something where you work alongside us and we say, this is an integral piece to the case. Yeah. Or the testing might give us enough and we just need a little supplemental thing or whatever it is. Yeah, it can happen. Cool. All right. Thank you. And thank you all very much. If you need something, you can always come up and talk to me or email me, but I really appreciate it. Thank you.